This is how I made my TRON submission for the Rampage Rally 3D Community Challenge. Usually I spend some time testing different ideas, but as soon as I saw the template on this reveal, I instantly knew what I would do. I definitely couldn't use the low poly light cycle I've been using in the distance for my last TRON scenes, so I went shopping and found this nice one from Nicole. After some extra detailing and making the materials, I looked for a good light jet, but I couldn't find one. So I spent the next couple days making this one from scratch with a simple rig, and the transition effect was something I made a year ago that came in really handy here. It's a node group with a bunch of animated nodes, mostly Voronoi textures, used in a bunch of different ways for dots, glitchy blocks, and stripes. That goes out to another node group referencing an empty location and scale to control the gradient distorted by another Voronoi. The gradient goes into a bunch of different color ramps to add slight variation to the effect as it reveals. All these get mixed to control the alpha and emission of the effect. And there's a mask channel leaving the whole node group along with the material to control when the full object texture shows up. And since this is all just in a node group, it can easily be copied into any material and assigned different empties for different controls. Alright, now into the scene file. I took the reference object from the template and just turned that into an empty to parent everything from the characters and vehicles to. This let me not have to reanimate the motion path and just adjust on top of what it's already doing. And of course it just took tweaking over time to get it to what it is in the end. So the transition itself was done by having the jet parented to the empty below the scene way out of view and timing the position swap with when the effect fully hid the light cycle so that it just snaps into place while they were both invisible. And of course, like I said before, since the effect is just a node group, I hooked that up to the vehicle materials and gave the light jet and the light cycle their own empties to control their own transitions. The light trails were made with the trail effects add-on, and I just modified the first preset to make it look more like the TRON light trail with glass and tuning the emission gradient. The terrain is pretty simple. It's all scaled and rotated instances of a couple block assets I made for my first TRON scene using the Plating and Greebles generator add-on. I made the material with a bunch of tech grunge textures, all set at different scales and color ramp gradients, and mixed together to get the techie rock surface look. There's also an object info node offsetting all the textures based on the instance location, so there's no repeating textures. Now on to what got a lot of attention in the render. The explosion was made in 6 parts. The fluid sim, particles, 2 sphere objects, 1 circle object, and a texture plane. The fluid sim took a bit to figure out, but I ended up using flip fluids in Blender for this. I placed a sphere on each part of the light cycle on the frame where it gets shot, and I used random transform to displace each of their locations and rotations, and I just keyframed all that. I had to use the graph editor to scale the curves in so that the objects that went below the floor were no longer going below the floor, and also adding some gravity through the animation curves. Using those as the fluid inflow sources, I ran the sims until I got a nice look, and enabling sheeting was very helpful for this look. The particles are a couple glass cubes broken up with self-fracture to emit from the same spheres for the fluid sim. The first layer of the explosion shockwave is made with wave nodes multiplied together to make an adjustable CRT dots look, cloned 3 times with 1 offset on the positive X and 1 offset on the negative X UV axis. The layers are fed into separate color nodes and added back together for the RGB effect on it. The second shockwave layer is a Fresnel effect sent through a couple color ramps for the color and alpha and an ambient occlusion node to make sure it's not clipping with anything. The ring is a clone of the first layer's material with the CRT dots just adjusted to have smaller dots and a couple extra wave and color ramp nodes for extra colors. The texture plane is a simple noise multiplied with a gradient, and the emission and alpha are animated on keyframes to help create more of a flash on impact. The canyon effects are done in 3 parts. First is a bunch of lines of vertices with a skin modifier and a scrolling noise texture. The second was made by fumbling through geonodes until I got something that works but still confuses me. And last, there's a simple emission plane with a gradient for an extra glow. For the particle systems in the scene, they're mostly just flat planes with cloud textures made with noise multiplied by gradients and mixed with transparency. I used this to make the jet stream effects, the jet turbulence, and the dirt kickup was also done with another particle layer of tiny cubes. And for the jet stream and jet turbulence effects, I also have particle info nodes on the particle materials to increase the transparency as each particle gets older. And the gunshots are 2 particle systems, one for the bolt meshes and the other for texture planes with flare textures on them. For the fog, I always use essentially the same volume setup in most to all of my renders. It's a gradient multiplied with noise crunched down in a color ramp or a map range to a pretty low maximum density. And the lights are all mostly light linked to the terrain so that there isn't harsh outlines of the lights in the volumetrics. Here's what it looks like without the lights and with. The lights that aren't light linked to the terrain are parented to a character and light linked to them so that they can stand out a little bit more in the frame and you can see a little bit more detail on them. So to fill out the sky and actually have some light on the volumetrics, I use the physical starlight and atmosphere add-on. Sometimes I'll use true sky. They're just really nice for a lot of sky art direction without worrying about trees or buildings getting in the way from an HDRI, or bad clouds because you can change those too. The camera shake was done with 3 noise modifiers in the graph editor on the camera's X, Y, and Z rotation curves. And this is the compositing setup I had going on. That big funky looking node is from the Cinematic Compositor Generator add-on. I feel like it just adds a little bit extra that's nice. And this is the final result. I'm really happy with how this came out. Thank you to everyone who gave their feedback while I was making this in the Discord or on TikTok or Instagram. It's always super fun to be part of these challenges, and the community is always so alive during them. And I always use these as a benchmark of my skills. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I am hyped for the next Tron movie coming out. Here's hoping it's good.